Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar on the Build America, Buy America Act's Buy America preference. This webinar is intended for HOPWA grantees. My name is Alexandra LaHood. I am with Enterprise Community Partners, the host for this webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the HUD Exchange with the presentation and transcript. Please note that the participant audio and chat is off. To view closed captions during the webinar, you may click on the CC icon in the controls toolbar. The Q&A function is available. We encourage you to listen to the presentation and enter your questions towards the end of the webinar. We will respond to questions live at the end of the presentation. If your question is not answered, or if you have additional questions, we will provide instructions at the end of the webinar on how to access the new BABA Ask a Question help desk on the HUD Exchange. With that, I pass it to our presenters.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Steinhauer. Just kidding. All right, now I'm on. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Steinhauer. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior program specialist in the Office of HIV/AIDS Housing at HUD, the office that administers the HOPWA program. I just want to thank everyone again for being here today. As we do continue to see new requirements come into effect, like BABA, we really do appreciate all of the effort that you put in as grantees and project sponsors to stay in compliance, while continuing to address the housing and service needs of people living with HIV and their families within your communities. We understand that you may have a lot of questions about the implementation of Build America, Buy America, or BABA, and I think we'll be able to address many of your questions today. In addition to the information that's going to be shared in this webinar, I do want to remind everyone that CPD Notice 2312 was published in November. And that notice provides implementation guidance for the Buy American preference, which again will be discussed here today. There's also a number of great resources on the HUD Exchange, and as trainings are completed, including this one, recordings, transcripts, and a copy of the slide deck are posted on the HUD Exchange. So lots of resources available. So again, thank you for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Clint.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Clint Whited. I'm here as part of the team with Enterprise Community Partners delivering the Build America, Buy America Act webinar series and technical assistance on behalf of HUD. It's my pleasure to be here with everyone today to discuss the Buy America preference as it applies to HOPWA funds. At this time, I'll hand the presentation over to my colleague, Chris Andrews, who'll get us started. Chris?
Great. Thank you, Clint. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Chris Andrews, he, his pronouns, part of the Enterprise Community Partners TA team. I'm here to talk with you all today about the BABA requirements and the Buy America preference. So today's session, we really want to dive into an overview of the Buy America preference, or the BAP requirement, of the Build America, Buy America Act, or BABA, and talk about how it applies to HOPWA grantees. We want to make sure that we are covering all of the basic steps that you all should be taking when you're thinking about implementing the BAP, when and how you should be implementing it, and in what instances it will apply to you. And then we have saved plenty of time for questions. So please, as we're going through, please submit your questions into the Q&A pod, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. So our agenda, we're going to begin kind of talking through project planning. What are the projects? What are the products that are covered by the regulation? What are the waivers that are in place? What is a flow chart to think through if the BAP does or does not apply to an individual activity? We'll then talk through project implementation and record keeping, and then look at a couple of different examples of when the BAP may or may not apply for some HOPWA activities. So first, what is the Build America, Buy America Act? The act requires that any iron, steel, construction materials, or manufactured products being used in a federally funded infrastructure project be produced in the United States. And within that act, the Buy America preference was established, and it applies to all federal infrastructure funding. So this is not unique to HUD, not unique to HOPWA. This is a federal-wide program that we are now talking about implementing. And I think it's really important to note, we're going to be talking for the most part about BABA and the BAP at a grantee level, but the requirements of the BAP, they're passed down through contracts, through project sponsor agreements, and purchase orders. So they will apply to any vendor, any contractor, any project sponsor, anyone working under the HOPWA program. So what are the projects and the products that are covered by the BAP? So first, what types of projects are covered? For the purposes of the BAP, an infrastructure project is defined quite broadly. So it includes any project where there is construction, maintenance, alteration, or repair. Even if the primary activity is not infrastructure, but the activity includes repair or maintenance or alteration or construction, the BAP would apply to that project. And so thinking about it from a HOPWA perspective, what are some examples of projects that are and are not covered? Primarily, where we'd be looking at the applicability of BAP is when we're looking at rehab or new construction of housing units. On the contrary, if you are just acquiring a housing unit with no rehab, no construction, no alteration, no maintenance, if you're providing housing information services, if you're providing operating costs, rental assistance, short-term payments, or any sort of supportive service or wraparound service, the BAP likely doesn't apply to those HOPWA activities. Really, it's only when we're looking at the rehab or the new construction of housing units. And then what are the products that are covered? All right, so this includes iron and steel, construction materials, and manufactured products. So let's kind of dive into each of those a little bit more. First, iron and steel. These are items consisting completely or predominantly of iron, steel, or both iron and steel. When you look in the regs, you look in the notice, you may see the term predominantly, you may see primarily. Those are interchangeable. And it means that the cost of the iron and steel content would be exceeding at 50% of the total cost of all of the items components. And all of the manufacturing, from the initial melting through the final coatings, must occur in the United States for iron and steel under the BAP requirements. The second product is construction materials. So these are in the notice and the guidance, they're kind of organized into two categories, specifically listed and not listed. Construction materials can include non-ferrous metals, plastic and polymer-based products, lumber, drywall, a number of different construction materials. And all the manufacturing processes for the construction materials must occur in the United States. And then the third product is manufactured products. So our manufactured product is a material that is developed into a specific form or shape through processing, or materials that are combined with other items to create a new or a different product with different properties, would meet the definition of a manufactured product. And so how does a manufactured product comply with the BAP? The final product must be manufactured or produced in the United States, and at least 55% of the cost components must be produced or manufactured in the United States. So we often get a lot of questions of how do you compare a manufactured product to a construction material? A plastic framed sliding window, that would be treated as a manufactured product, right? You're bringing together multiple materials to create that product, to create that window. Plate glass, that would be treated as construction material, right? That is a single product. So if you have questions on what is or is not a manufactured product, what is or is not a construction material, encourage you all look at CPD Notice 2312, look at the regs in 2 CFR 184, and we'll really talk through the nuance of each definition. So let's move to project planning. And really, we're looking at a couple of different outcome types, right? So the first outcome is, does the project need to comply with the BAP? Or if it doesn't, are you able to utilize one of HUD's general waivers? And we'll talk about those. Are you able to obtain a project-specific waiver to exclude the project or a portion of the project from the BAP? And we'll talk about that process as well. Or the BAP doesn't apply because the project doesn't meet the definition of an infrastructure project, right? You're just providing short-term rental assistance payments or supportive services or case management services that don't meet the definition of infrastructure, then the BAP wouldn't apply. And to help me think about that, it's really helpful to kind of think that through a flow chart and ask a number of questions to determine, does the BAP apply, to an individual project? And we'll walk through each of these steps in more detail. But the questions that we'll be asking are, are the funds being used for an infrastructure project? Yes or no. If yes, we'll continue. If no, the BAP doesn't apply. Do the committed funds include HOPWA grants? If yes, we'll continue down our HOPWA track. If no, from a HOPWA perspective, the BAP doesn't apply. If you're using other federal funds, the BAP may still apply. Does the project use any products that are subject to the BAP? Is it using iron and steel, construction materials, manufactured products? If no, the BAP doesn't apply. If yes, we'll move on. Step number 4, did HUD obligate the HOPWA funds on or after the effective date of the BAP? And we'll review those dates in a few minutes. If no, the BAP doesn't apply. If yes, we'll move on. Is the project covered in whole or in part by any of the HUD general waivers? If it's covered, the BAP doesn't apply. If no, could the project qualify for a project-specific waiver? If yes, then you might be able to consider that waiver for all or a portion of the product. And if no, in all likelihood, the BAP applies to the project. What I found myself doing, what I found my colleagues doing is any activity that we're working on, we go through a flow chart like this for each activity and document our decision kind of for each of these steps and maintain that. And Clint will talk about this, but we maintain that in our file so we can show, okay, look, we determined that the BAP does apply, or we determined that the BAP doesn't apply, for any project. So if you're being monitored or audited in a year, in a couple of years, you're able to go back and look and have that documentation of how you made that determination before beginning that project. So let's go into these in a bit more depth. So step number one, are the funds being used for an infrastructure project? Right? Are we looking at construction, alteration, maintenance, repair, or rehab of real property? Right, so this might be from a HOPWA perspective, where we're looking at the rehab or maintenance or reconstruction of housing units or other buildings, renovation of an SRO building or other public facilities. If yes, that is likely an infrastructure project. If you're talking about rental assistance, if you're talking about just operating costs, if you're talking about case management or admin fees, that would not be an infrastructure activity. So you'd answer no. So step number two, do the committed funds to the project include HOPWA? If yes, we'll continue on. If no, the BAP's not applying to the project due to the inclusion of HOPWA or the CPD funds, but you need to consider if the BAP would apply due to the inclusion of any other federal funding. So if you're also including HHS funding or another HUD funding source, the BAP may still apply. And so make sure that you're looking at BAP applicability from each funding source that you're including in the project. So moving on to step number three. Does the project use any products that are subject to the BAP? And so here you'll really want to make sure that you're reviewing your scope of work, your budget documents to determine if any materials that are going to be used in that project will be subject to the BAP, right? Will there be iron or steel or construction materials or manufactured products? If yes, continue on. If no, the BAP doesn't apply. Step number four, and this is a really important slide, so we're going to stay on this slide for a minute. Did HUD obligate the HOPWA funds on or after the effective date of the BAP? And the effective date of the BAP varies for different CPD programs, so make sure if you're looking at a chart like this, you're looking at it for HOPWA grants. And as you can see, it varies for different types of products being used. So beginning on February 22nd, 2024, so in about a month, that will be the effective date for iron and steel. So that means if you execute your grant agreement with HUD for HOPWA funding on or after February 22nd, 2024, the BAP will apply for any activity funded with those dollars. And then on August 23rd, 2024, so 6 months later, it will also apply for not listed construction materials, specifically listed construction materials, and manufactured products. So any grant agreement executed with HUD on or after August 23rd, 2024, the BAP would apply for all covered materials, iron and steel, construction materials, and manufactured products. And I just want to reiterate again, the date that you're looking at is not when you begin the activity. The date is the date that HUD signed the grant agreement with you. So if that grant agreement is signed on February 21st, 2024, great. The BAP would not apply for iron and steel for any of those funds. But if it were signed a day later, any activity that those funds are touching, you would need to document if the BAP does or does not apply. So moving on, is the project covered in whole or in part by any of the HUD general waivers? And the first general waiver is exigent circumstances. Is there an urgent need to complete the project because of a threat to life, safety, or property? If that is the case, the exigent circumstances waiver may apply, and the BAP is not required for the project. The second general waiver is the de minimis and small grants waiver. So, and this is broken into two parts. Is the total cost of the project from all sources equal to or less than $250,000? And the important clause there is from all sources. So even if HOPWA is only contributing $100,000, but the total budget is $300,000, this waiver wouldn't apply. But if the total project budget is less than $250,000, this waiver can apply. And then the second part of this waiver is that you can apply it to a portion of the products used in an infrastructure project. So if the cumulative cost of the covered products does not exceed 5% of the total cost of covered products that you're wanting to waive, you can use this waiver for that portion of products. Step 6, could the project qualify for a project-specific waiver? So project-specific waivers, they can be issued for 3 different reasons. We'll talk about those in a second. And they are done on a case-by-case basis. It is not exclusively a HUD review process. OMB's Made in America office is also involved in the review of any project-specific waiver. So project-specific waivers are generally done for 3 reasons. A public interest waiver, requiring the use of an American-made product, would be inconsistent with the public interest. A non-availability waiver, the you need is not produced in the United States in sufficient quantities or in a satisfactory manner to be able to use for the product, for the project, excuse me, or an unreasonable cost waiver. The inclusion of that American-made product would increase the cost of the overall project by more than 25%. And so if you think that your project would meet one of these thresholds, a project-specific waiver could be considered. To do that, you begin by contacting the general HUD BABA email, cbdbaba@hud.gov. You prepare your waiver request with the information required by OMB. Then you submit that waiver application with all of your supporting documentation to HUD at Build America, Buy America at HUD.gov. You likely will be asked for more information during the review process. You proceed with a public comment period in the Federal Register and final approval from OMB. And then all approved waivers will ultimately be posted on the madeinamerica.gov website. If you have questions on the project-specific waiver process, I do encourage you to look at CPD Notice 2312. The project-specific waiver requirements are discussed on page 19 of that notice. So before I turn it over to Clint to talk through project implementation and record keeping, again, just want to come back to the flow chart. I encourage you all to download this or develop a similar flow chart that you can follow for all of your projects and activities. Right? Number one, are the funds being used for an infrastructure project? Number two, do the committed funds include HOPWA grants? Number three, does the project use products subject to the BAP? Number four, did HUD obligate the HOPWA funds on or after the effective date of the BAP? And again, those effective dates for HOPWA are February 22nd, 2024 and August 23rd, 2024. Step five, could the project be covered by any of the HUD general waivers? And then step six, could the project qualify for a project-specific waiver? And with that, Clint, I will turn it over to you to talk through implementation and record keeping.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Now that we have a better understanding of the steps we need to follow to determine if the BAP applies to our HOPWA funded projects, let's talk a little bit more about how to implement what we've learned. Documenting your BAP determination, whether your project is subject to it or not, is critical for all projects. As always, it's important to follow all established record keeping requirements and to maintain good records in our files. So to operationalize the BAP requirements locally, you should review your existing procurement policies and procedures to ensure that BAP requirements are included in procurement documents and contracts. The BAP language is already included in HOPWA HUD grant agreements in the special conditions section. So you can look at the special conditions section and grab the language straight from your grant agreement. That language should be incorporated into all of your agreements, even if the BAP does not yet apply because of the phased implementation date that we discussed earlier. The BAP must be included in all bidding documents, subawards, contracts, and purchase orders for the products supplied to complete the work. So for record keeping, grantees should follow standard requirements for record keeping on all HOPWA projects. Maintaining detailed compliance documentation that clearly shows how you determined applicability of the BAP and how you implemented the BAP requirements is important. Without good documentation, it's impossible to demonstrate compliance when your project is monitored. When we talk about documentation and record keeping, this includes maintaining copies of all written communication with stakeholders about the BAP requirements in your project file, documenting and keeping detailed notes on your BAP determination, and collecting, reviewing, and filing copies of all product certifications for the project as required by HOPWA. So keep all of those documents in your file to demonstrate your process. So let's shift gears here a little bit from record keeping and talk a little bit about some project examples and apply what we've learned. So our first example, I've got two for you. Our first one is in January 2023, so last year, a grantee awarded $1 million in FY23 HOPWA funds obligated by HUD in December 2023 to a project sponsor for the rehab of housing units for eligible households. Does the BAP apply to this project? So thinking back on the BAP determination process that Chris walked us through earlier, there are a few important things to consider here. First is what we described in the example, an infrastructure project according to the definition. Second, does the project include iron and steel, manufactured products, or construction materials? You might need to take a close look at CPD Notice 2023-12 to refresh your memory on the two types of construction materials, those that are specifically listed and not listed. Three, is the funding subject to the BAP based on the phased implementation waiver? And do any of the other waivers apply? So we're talking about the general waivers, exigent circumstances, de minimis, or small grants. So thinking about all of those things in this example, let's take a look at our answer. So what we see here is that the project's total budget is $1 million. The project is an infrastructure project. However, the grant funds were obligated by HUD before February 22nd, 2024. So the phased implementation waiver applies, which means that the BAP does not apply to our project. Let's move forward and take a look at a second example. So our second example, in May 2025, in the future, a grantee awards $200,000 of FY 2024 HOPWA funds that were obligated by HUD in January 2025 for the construction of new housing units. The project sponsor is using several other local funding sources, and the total project budget is $500,000. Does the BAP apply to this project? So again, as you walk back through your determination process that we discussed earlier, your key questions include, is it an infrastructure project according to the definition? Does it include iron and steel, manufactured products, or construction materials? Is the funding subject to the BAP based on phased implementation? And do any of the waivers apply? Let's take a look at our answer, and our answer is yes. So in this case, the BAP applies. The total cost of the project from all sources is more than $250,000. The project is an infrastructure project, and the funds were obligated by HUD after February 24th, 2024, for iron and steel, and then also after August 23rd, 2024 for construction materials and manufactured products. So in this particular example, the BAP applies to iron and steel, construction materials, and manufactured products. And it's important to remember that products, a couple of things here for this example, as you move forward with implementing the BAP fully. Products may only be classified into one category, and the way that you classify those products must be based on the product status when it arrives at the work site. So you're going to get that question a lot from developers or contractors, how to classify certain materials for the purpose of their certification, and it's based on the product status when it arrives at the work site. So a couple of good examples there for you. I think we're seeing a couple of questions come into the Q&A, but if you have others, feel free to pose those questions to us in the Q&A, and we'll have some time at the end of today's presentation to look at a couple of those. And before we go over some of the key takeaways, just wanted to, again, encourage folks to take advantage of the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Let's get into some more key takeaways from today's presentation. First, we learned that the BAP applies to projects that include construction, alteration, maintenance, and repair of infrastructure. Then we learned that all components necessary to complete an infrastructure project should be classified to identify those items in the project scope to which the BAP applies. Those classifications include iron and steel, construction materials, or manufactured products. Finally, it's important that you review your pipeline of projects, both those that are currently underway and those that you're planning, to identify which projects and materials are going to be subject to the BAP. For more details on each of these items, you can always refer to the CPD Quick Guide that is posted on the HUD Exchange website. Also, we strongly encourage you to review the steps in Notice CPD 2023-12 to determine the applicability of the BAP at both the project and product level. Chris walked us through all of those steps with the flow chart earlier in the session. Very important to follow those steps and consider each of the questions in the flow chart to reach an accurate determination. Additionally, make sure that you document the process that you use to determine if the BAP applies. Record keeping, as always, is critical on your HOPWA funded projects. Also, be sure that you're including the BAP language in all of your written agreements, contracts, subawards, and material procurement documents. This is going to set you up for success when you ask contractors and material suppliers for their BAP product certifications at the end of the job. And finally, in our key takeaways, Just wanted to again remind you all of the general waivers for the BAP, which include if there are exigent circumstances and the time spent in complying would affect the health and safety of the public, the exigent circumstances waiver may apply. If the total project cost is less than $250,000, the de minimis waiver may apply. And the phased implementation waiver spreads the effective dates for the programs and materials out over time. So pay attention to that February 22nd, 2024 date, as well as the August 2024 date for products and materials. The project-specific waivers may be available for a few different reasons. Adhering to the BAP would be inconsistent with public interest. Covered materials aren't produced in the United States in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or of a satisfactory quality, so that's non-availability. And finally, inclusion of a covered material would increase the cost of the overall project by more than 25%. That's your unreasonable cost project-specific waiver. Also, important to note that grantees should identify Made in America sources for necessary materials as early as feasible in the project. To identify the need, should one arise for a project or a product-specific waiver as soon as possible. This way, you'll know early on if you need to pursue a project or a product-specific waiver. Again, refer to Notice CPD 2023-12 for more information about general waivers and project or product specific waivers. Now at this time, I'd like to bring Lisa from HUD back in before we move on to Q&A. Lisa, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thanks so much, Clint and Chris, for your presentation. That was a lot of really helpful information. And I know we just did some key takeaways, but I did want to take a minute just to reiterate a couple of points from both Clint and Chris that were made during today's session. So first, just make sure that you're evaluating all your projects and activities to determine if BAP applies, and then document that decision in your project files. And then second, make sure you're passing down that BAP, the BAP requirements to project sponsors, contractors, and vendors. I know that we were reminded of those things quite a few times. And then finally, if you do have questions after this webinar, I know we're about to do the Q&A, but you can submit those questions through the AAQ on the HUD Exchange for additional guidance as you start to work through these new requirements. And before we get into the AAQ, I did just want to say, as always, thank you for all of the work that you're doing to meet the housing needs of people with HIV and their families in your communities. This is hard work to do it all, including complying with the requirements. So thank you for that. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over for the Q&A portion to round us out.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We are seeing a number of good questions come in through the Q&A portal. So thank all of you who have had the opportunity to submit questions. I'm seeing a couple here that I'll go ahead and get us started with. And Chris is in the background looking at a few of the other questions. So we'll tag team and go back and forth on questions here and get to as many of these as we can with the time that we have. So the first question is a bit of an easy one. Will the webinar presentation and recording be shared with attendees? We got that from a few people. And of course, the webinar presentation, our transcription and recording will be posted to the HUD Exchange website in approximately 1 month following the webinar. So this presentation will be available with the transcript, and anyone will be able to access it from the new BABA webpage on the HUD Exchange. So we're going to make sure we get these resources posted so that they're there for you as you move forward with your HOPWA projects over the next few years. Seeing some more questions come in. I've got a second one here for you. The question is, can you confirm the applicability dates from phased implementation waiver? Certainly can. Yes, the BAP applies for iron and steel. So we're applying the BAP for iron and steel beginning on February 22nd, 2024. For all other covered products, August 23rd, 2024. And so that's, if the grant funds were obligated on or after that date, then the BAP will apply. So again, February 22nd, 2024 for iron and steel, August 23rd, 2024 for your covered products. Toss it over to Chris. Chris, do you have a few for us?
Yeah. So question clarifying, what are the activities that the BAP does and does not apply to? And so the BAP only applies to infrastructure projects. So we're looking at buildings or real property, and where there is construction, repair, maintenance, or alteration to that building or to that real property is when the BAP would be applying. Any other activity, again, right, if you're talking about rental assistance or case management or supportive services or operating costs for a program, the BAP would not apply. Let's see. So question, kind of wanting to better understand the $250,000 threshold. If a $200,000 2024 HOPWA project using iron and steel is funded with an additional $150,000 in local and state funding, does the BAP apply to the entire project or just the HOPWA portion? It's a great question. The BAP would apply to the entire project budget. So in this case, 200 plus 150, the $350,000 budget, the BAP would apply to everything, not just the HOPWA portion. Clint, do you have others?
Yeah, I've got a few more here. Got a good steady flow of questions coming in, and thank you all for submitting these questions. This one is there specific project sponsor agreement language for BABA that we should be including in our upcoming 2024 agreements? And great question, absolutely. Grantees may include the BABA language from their FY24 HOPWA grant agreements in any project sponsor agreements to ensure that BABA compliance is addressed by project sponsors and contractors. That language is in the special conditions section of your FY24 HOPWA grant agreement. Additionally, that language is also included as Addendum 3 of CPD Notice 2023-12. So HUD is providing the precise language that you can go ahead and put in your agreements to ensure that folks are on notice to comply with BABA for your projects. So go ahead and grab that from the CPD notice or from your grant agreement and drop it into your agreements and procurement documents. Seeing some additional questions come in. Here's one. Does the BAP apply to contractors and vendors or just project sponsors? So the BAP applies to any entity who is carrying out the activity or the project. So that could include a vendor, a contractor, or project sponsor. The BAP requirements must be included in grant agreements, contracts, purchase orders for the work performed or products supplied under the federal award. So make sure that the BAP language and the BABA language is included in all of your agreements and procurement documents, so that the folks who are carrying out the project, who are installing iron, carrying out the infrastructure project that involves iron and steel, that involves manufactured products, that involves construction materials, that those folks, whomever they may be and whatever their role might be in the project, are on notice that the BAP applies or may apply. Another question here. This one's pretty straightforward. Does the BAP apply to 2022 and 2023 HOPWA grants already obligated? So this is phased implementation. No, the BAP would not apply to those awards unless money from 2022 or 2023 obligations were combined with other BAP covered funds and used in projects valued above $250,000. But just using 2022 or 2023 HOPWA funds or HOPWA grants isn't enough alone to trigger the BAP. There need to be another triggering factor there. Keeping in mind, again, your phased implementation dates of February 22nd, 2024 and August 23rd, 2024 for iron and steel and for other covered products, respectively. So at this point, Chris, do you have a couple of questions for us?
Yeah. Can you describe the emergency or exigent waiver one more time and provide an example when it would be appropriate? So this waiver applies whenever there is an urgent need by the grantee to immediately complete an infrastructure project because of a threat to life, safety, or property of residents or the community. So feels appropriate given how cold it is for most of us on the webinar today. As an example, imagine if a heating system dies in a property owned by the project sponsor, and that heating system needs to be replaced immediately to ensure the safety of the current residents. The replacement parts would fall under the emergency waiver and would not be subject to the BAP. So, right, the most important thing is to get that heating system back up and running to make sure that everybody in that building is staying safe and healthy, and you would not need to comply with the BAP requirements. Clint, others coming in?
Yeah, I've got one here that we can go over. So the question is, when determining the de minimis of a project, do we base the amount off of federal funding for the project or the entire project budget amount? And this is a great question. So if covered BAP materials for a portion of the project comprise no more than 5% of the total cost of covered materials used in a project, not to exceed $1 million, the BAP can be waived for that portion of the project. If the total budget for covered materials is $500,000, the maximum would be $25,000 or 5%. So again, it's based on an implementation of the de minimis in a project is based on the total cost of covered materials used in the project. And so, for example, if you had $500,000 of covered materials in the project, the maximum de minimis amount would be $25,000 or 5%. Chris,
Great.
are you seeing additional?
Yeah. So yeah, and again, thank you all for these questions. Great questions coming in. Here's kind of hypothetically, let's say an agreement with a project sponsor is executed with funds that were obligated after August 23rd, 2024. There is a plan to build a $750,000 HOPWA home and also a $250,000 home, both ground up new build. The question being, does this mean that all the iron, the steel, the construction materials, and the manufactured materials have to be made in America? The answer is generally yes, unless you can use a project-specific waiver, or if you are going to use the minor components of the portion of the de minimis waiver, you might be able to exclude a portion of the covered products. But in general, yes, all of your covered products at that point must comply with the BAP.
Right. Seeing question come in here, is accurately fulfilling BAP guidelines or BAP requirements the sole responsibility of the HOPWA grantee or project sponsor? So the appropriate way to address this is that it is a shared responsibility. First, it starts with HUD, and HUD has provided CP Notice 2023-12, provides guidance and requirements. They've provided contract language in your FY24 grant agreements in the special conditions section. The HOPWA grantee is then incorporating that language into all of its agreements with project sponsors and others using HOPWA funds. And then those individuals or entities that are implementing HOPWA funds, implementing projects using HOPWA funds, would then be obligated to comply with the BAP. So again, it's a requirement that is passed down in your project agreements, from HUD to the grantee project sponsor. Chris, are you seeing any more questions at this
Yeah,
time?
yeah, a couple more questions. I'm just clarifying, does this mean that the BAP, would apply to smaller items too, like nails or screws, or siding, if it's found that the project is applicable? And the answer is yes. So if, it is iron and steel, construction materials, or manufactured product, it would apply. We've got time for one more question. Kind of asking a little bit more about record keeping and different ways of record keeping. This is, I'm going to use this first as a little bit of a plug for a webinar that will be in late February. We're going to be doing a case study webinar where we talk through different record keeping examples. We're going to have hopefully a grantee on talking about their experience of BAP applicability, as well as HUD and some other stakeholders on talking about different ways to actually think about the implementation and record keeping and different tools. The important thing that I will say here is it is the responsibility of the grantee to make sure that they are maintaining compliance and documentation, and their record keeping is in accordance with 2 CFR 184, with the record keeping requirements of the HOPWA program, and with the CPD notice. So, you do have a little bit of autonomy in thinking about that record keeping. And so with that, I do just want to take a couple of minutes to highlight a couple of resources that are out there and talk about what else is coming in terms of TA products and trainings. One, if you haven't already, do encourage everyone to go to the BABA site on the HUD Exchange. We have all of the trainings that we've done are there. We have quick guides. There are other resources that are available. The waiver documentation is there. CPD notice is there on the HUD Exchange site. On the BABA on HUD.gov site, there is an FAQ document, as well as all of the waiver documentation and the underlying regulations for BABA, if you're wanting to dive in a little bit more. If you haven't looked at it already and you want to learn a little bit more about BABA or get an overview or share an overview with colleagues of yours who couldn't be here today, do encourage you to share both the BABA CPD Overview Quick Guide and the HOPWA Quick Guide. Both of these are posted on the HUD Exchange. There's also a CPD Overview webinar that was recorded back in the beginning of November of 2023, and do encourage you all to take a look at that. And then just so you all have it, your primary regulatory citation is 2 CFR 184, which is where all of the BAP language is. And then it's also called out in 2 CFR 200 in section 3.322. And then I know we've mentioned it a number of times, but can't plug it enough. Make sure you check out the CPD notice 2312. I think we got to most of your questions. There were a few very specific questions, a few questions we didn't have time to get to. Please go ahead and submit them on the AAQ. When you are submitting those questions on the AAQ, provide as much detail as you can and indicate that you're talking about a HOPWA activity, what year the funding is that you're thinking about, just so that those responding can make sure they can give you the most accurate and complete answer possible. And then finally, we've had a number of webinars for different CPD programs. As Clint mentioned, the materials for this webinar will be posted in about a month on the HUD Exchange. And in February, the date should be finalized soon. There will be a case study webinar, again, where we'll have industry partners, HUD, hopefully a grantee, kind of talking about their experience of implementation and record keeping. And then finally, there will be a webinar for home and HTF grantees in April of this year. And so with that, I know it's a busy time of year. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today to talk through HOPWA and the Buy America preference. If you do have additional questions, please do make sure to submit them to the AAQ, and we'll make sure our colleagues and team members will get back to you as quickly as possible. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.